Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 419. Thank you for joining me today. Happy Friday. Hope you guys have had a good week. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast. And we've been talking about the crises of the third century that the Roman Empire faced that changed the Roman Empire forever. And we've been relating it to the third century of the United States as we approach our 250th birthday next week. And relating the crises from the third century of the Roman Empire with what I am calling the third century crises of the United States in our third century. And, we also in the last podcast mentioned the quote from Alexander Fraser Tyler, the Scottish judge and historian. And he wrote that the average age of the world's greatest civilization has been 200 years. And that is around the time, if you understand this history, not only the Roman Empire, empires prior to the Roman Empire, the Greek empires, even, Babylonian Empire, all around 200 years, they have a zenith and then they start declining. In the Roman Empire, the zenith was the period of Pax Romana, and then it starts to decline into the third century crisis and changes forever. It doesn't mean that the empires, cease to exist, but they end up changing and are not the empires that they were at the high point during the zenith. And you can see that Tyler goes further into his explanation. It says Tyler's broader commentary on this idea was part of a larger critique on democracy and the rise and fall of nations. He describes a cynical pattern. This is his pattern, that nations go from bondage to spiritual faith, from faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness. This is where we are right now in the United States. Actually, we could be here. From abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence. No, we may be here. From apathy to dependence, and then from dependence to bondage. We could be here. Could be already here, from dependence to bondage. I don't believe that we're here yet, but I believe that we're going here. I believe that we are from apathy to dependence in this cynical cycle. So we were talking about the crises of the Roman Empire in their third century. It says that the crisis began around 235 with the assassination of Severus Alexander. But the issues that they were facing, barbarian invasions, migration, civil wars, peasant revolts, political instability, usurpers, competing for power, debasement of currency, plague, economic productivity, breakdowns with economic productivity and trade networks. And I was explaining how some of these crises that the Roman Empire faced in their third century parallel with crises that we are facing in our third century, but some of the crises that we're facing in our third century are unique to us. And Roman Empire had unique crises that they were facing. So I'm going to continue doing these podcasts even beyond the 4th of July next week, because we have a lot of crises. We've covered 4 so far. I'm going to introduce a new crisis today, but I'm going to do the podcast today and then do a podcast on Monday. And then it's going to be I guess it would be the 6th of July, that following Monday, because I'm not going to do a podcast on the Friday before the 4th of July, the 6th of July, and I'll come back and then we'll introduce another crisis. I don't know how many of these I'll do, thinking about even after doing these different podcasts on the crises that we face in our third century, writing essays on each crisis and maybe even compiling it in a book. But anyway, so the crises that we've already talked about, let's recap. The first crisis we talked about was election crises. And, we have an election crisis in this country that the crisis is that our elections are not fair and the leadership in this country are not interested in making it fair on either side. Both sides benefit from unfair elections. Democrats and Republicans, they both rig elections. We talked about this when we did that podcast, that in the first part of the 21st century, that Democrats were accusing Republicans over and over again of stealing presidential elections. They accused George Bush of stealing 2000 election, the 2004 election, which he actually really did. Those elections were rigged, absolutely. But Democrats were the ones that were complaining about it. Now Republicans are complaining about it, and the problem with, and the reason it's a crisis is because when people don't have faith in the elections, then you have more political instability. You have more things like January. The reason January 6th happened is because millions of people believed that the election was stolen. Not because Trump said it was stolen. It didn't matter what Trump said. I watched that election. There's nothing that you can do to convince me that Joe Biden won that election fairly. And there's millions of people still to this day that believe that the election was stolen. And all this has happened in the last 26 years. When Barbara Boxer joins a member of the House of Representatives to contest the electoral votes of Ohio in 2004, that had never happened in 100 years. It's happened twice in the last 26 years. It happened in 2004, and then it happens again in 2020. What do the leaders do? Do they change the electoral system to make it more open, make it more transparent, make it more fair? No, they changed the law after 2020 to make the threshold higher to contest the electoral votes, because it's happened twice in the last 26 years. Don't not make the system more fair and open it up. Change the rules and raise the threshold for how many members of Congress it takes to contest the election. This is a crisis because people that don't trust the electoral system don't participate. If people don't participate, then you don't have people trusting the system, and that is going to increase in the future the potential for more civil unrest like what happened on January 6th. And then the second crisis that we talked about the education crisis and the ignorance crisis in this country, which is a huge crisis, and all intentional. We talked about the fact that Rockefeller, Carnegie invested millions of dollars in the early part of the 20th century to create a education system that did not educate, that only created, mindless workers that didn't know how to think critically. And now we are decades down the line and the entire population is dumb. It's a crisis. And both of these first two crises that I talked about are something that are unique to us. The Roman Empire didn't deal with this because they were an empire. They didn't have to worry about an election system because they had emperors. They didn't have to worry about an educated populace because the population didn't need to take part in the governing of the country, have an active civic responsibility in the Roman Empire because they were an empire. We're a constitutional republic. We have a democratic system where each of us have to take part and have a civic responsibility. You need to be educated. That's why it is a crisis. You have to be able to critically think through issues. And you're seeing the results of our population being dumbed down. All of this, again, is by design. The third crisis we talked about in the third podcast was the debt crisis. And for me, this is the most serious crisis because this crisis has the potential to bring this country to its knees. This is our largest national security threat, is our debt. $40 trillion is where we're approaching. And I don't think people really understand how much $40 trillion is. That's a lot of money, people. That's a lot of money. And it's all of this was added. All of this happened over the last 26 years. This all happened in the 21st century. It all started in 2000. And you can see that this is when this crisis happened over the administrations of these people and Donald Trump. I don't want to leave Donald Trump out because he's been created, but he's come later in the game. And, a lot of the debt that he's adding, is, not all of it, but a lot of it is servicing the debt, and the debt, just growing out of hand. He hasn't, stopped the spending. Nobody on either side, no Democrat or Republican, cares about this crisis, but it's a huge crisis. But most of this was created. The beginning of this, as you see the start, right around 2003, when they're taking us off to war and spending all this money in the Middle East while cutting taxes, all of this happened. It was set up under Clinton administration, but it was done under the Bush administration. And then from Bush to Obama, cousins, Bush and Obama are cousins. You had complete continuity. They created each one of these crises are done on purpose. The election crisis, they're purposely, the ruling elite are purposely keeping our election system where they can easily rig it in their favor. They both benefit from that because, in elite circles, they have no allegiance. They don't care about party. That's for you. They don't care about left, right. That's for you to keep you divided. They don't care about that stuff. So, the election crisis is orchestrated by the elite, and they keep it that way. They don't have no matter if you're right or left, they don't have any plans on changing that. The education crisis, they want you dumbed down so you don't recognize what they're doing and looting you. And the looting happens with the debt. The debt is not just going into thin air. This $40 trillion, as it goes out of the public treasury, this is being transferred into the hands of private individuals. This is wealth transfer. It comes out of the public treasury. We go into debt, and it goes into private hands, and all their friends get rich. So that leads us to the fourth crisis that we talked about last week, is the treason crisis. And people, you have to be big boys and big girls. Put on your big boy pants and your big girl pants and get out of this mindset of conspiracy theory. There's treason. And people, I brought up in the last podcast I wasn't talking about Israel, but I was talking about Netanyahu making a call to American Jews who owe their allegiance to America, calling them and asking them to have more loyalty to Israel. I mean, that's just an example, but there's many examples of treason. Think about the Kennedy assassination. Was the Kennedy assassination a situation of a foreign attack on America or treason? It was treason. Even if you believe the official story that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was an American, killed John Kennedy, that's an act of treason. It's a ridiculous story if you believe that. If you believe Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for killing Kennedy, that's ridiculous. But even if you do believe that, then that's an act of treason. But it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald, and it was an act of treason. But you want to know what else was an act of treason? 9/11, people. 9/11 was an act of treason. This wasn't an act of a foreign invader attacking us. Bush was warned many times, most notably on August 6th, a month before 9/11, that terrorists were in the country and they were preparing to hijack planes. He knew that they were going to hijack planes. He didn't do anything to stop them. Now, one single thing, that's treason. That's treason. But that was their plan. That was their plan to, how are you going to get this debt? Because they wanted to get the debt. What do I mean they wanted to get the debt? That goes back to I've shared this article so many times, but this document from the Clinton administration that was written in the year 2000, and it's called Life After Debt. And they were warning as a potential crisis that the United States was getting ready to pay off all of its debt. Again, you can go back here on the debt clock time machine and you can go to the year 2000. And on this day, in the year 2000, the national debt was just under $5.7 trillion. And it was a crisis because the United States was getting ready to pay off. If the United States was going for the 2 years prior to 2000, we didn't have budget deficits. We had budget surpluses. The United States was taking in more money than it was spending. Right now, we have a nearly $2 trillion deficit. But the 2 years before 2000, when we were at peace, we weren't at war with anyone, we had budget surpluses. Okay, so they were predicting at the rate that we were going, taking in more money than we were paying out, paying off debt, that we were going to be completely debt-free in 12 years, and they identified it as a crisis.
Melissa Block, and now a story about a secret government document that dates from the Clinton administration, outlining what was believed to be a looming potential crisis. Not a matter of terrorism or national security. No, the crisis was, imagine this, the possibility that the U.S. might pay off its entire debt. David Kestenbaum with our Planet.
So the crisis was the United States was going to pay off all of its debt. They identified that in the Clinton administration. They set it up in the Clinton administration. Clinton's Treasury Secretary, when that secret document, which they kept secret, the only reason that we know anything about that document, Life After Debt, is because NPR went and got it through a FOIA request a decade later. But they kept this document secret. It was written in 2000, but I'm sure they talked about this prior to 2000. In 2000, Clinton's Treasury Secretary was Larry Summers, but prior to 2000, his Treasury Secretary was Robert Rubin. Robert Rubin was Treasury Secretary, came from Goldman Sachs to become Treasury Secretary. They deregulate all the derivatives. They repeal Glass-Steagall. Robert Rubin repeals Glass-Steagall for Citigroup, and then after he retires as from Treasury Secretary, he goes and works as CEO of Citigroup. And then he resigns from Citigroup just before the crash in 2008 and cashes out all of his stock like he knew what was going to happen because they had set it up in the Clinton administration. And then Bush, the brother from another mother, comes in, and then he lets 9/11 happen, take us off to war, cuts taxes while he's taking us off to war so they can raise the debt. And then the whole reason that they deregulated everything is because the plan was that we're going to use the housing market. The housing market is going to show growth, that while we're increasing the debt, as we're increasing the debt on all these foreign wars and cutting taxes, we need to show growth in the economy so it doesn't hurt us politically. So we're going to use the housing market. How are we going to use the housing market? We're going to write loans. We're going to enlist go look at Bush's American Dream plan, and that he announced in 2001, the American Dream Act, that he tells all of the lenders to lower their standards, to anybody with the pulse, give them a loan. They knew it was fraudulent, and they knew that it was going to crash when it crashed in 2008. You really understand how the crash happened. The crash happened because a rumor spread about the liquidity of some of these large institutions that had all these derivatives that were tied to the real estate that weren't worth anything. They set the whole thing up. That's what I'm trying to tell you, people. They set it up. Treason. Treason is what I'm telling you, people. Treason. Many examples of treason. Well, and then so you had Clinton. They set it up in the Clinton administration. It was planned for Bush to come in and, not do anything about all the warnings about 9/11, let it happen. And then he can take us off to war and start raising the debt. And then from Bush to Obama, from cousin to cousin, you have complete continuity. You want me to explain how the continuity was so complete from George Bush to Obama? Obama kept Bush's father's director of Central Intelligence on as the Secretary of Defense when he comes in and says change has come to America. What do you mean change? Your Secretary of Defense is George H.W. Bush's Director of Central Intelligence. This guy was Deputy Director of Central Intelligence under Reagan. He ran Iran-Contra. He was Deputy Director of Central Intelligence under Bill Casey in the Reagan administration. He ran Iran-Contra. And then became George H.W. Bush's director of Central Intelligence. And then when Rumsfeld retires in 2006, George Bush brings him on as Secretary of Defense. And Obama, who runs on change you can't believe in, keeps Robert Gates on the CIA director as Secretary of Defense. What kind of change is that? It was complete continuity. And this guy, he was in the Senate the entire time. He was in the Senate the entire Clinton administration. He was in the Senate the entire Bush administration. He helped Bush get Democrat authorization for the war. And then Barack Obama picks him as his vice president. And then he steals the 2020 election. These people did it to you. All of this, this crisis happened over the last 26 years. And these people are responsible. Well, today's crisis, the crisis we're going to talk about, is a crisis of division, a tribalism crisis. And this is a serious crisis that threatens the longevity of the United States. And most of it is along racial lines. At least that's what I want to focus on, racial tribalism. Because like all of these other crises that we've talked about, this is all by design. And it is, powerful people that are feeding into people's base instincts, natural urges to be tribal. And this threatens, the longevity. But again, you have to think about this. You have to think that these guys are looting you, them and their friends. They're looting you. This is wealth transfer. And for them to do this, all of these crises, every single one that I've talked about, starting with the election crisis. They have to be able to rig the elections to loot you. And the election crisis, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're on the left or the right or the middle, you should care about free and fair elections because that is what our democracy, that's the foundation of our republic, free and fair elections. You should care about that. And it shouldn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. The education crises and the ignorance crises, that it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican on the left or right, you should care about fair elections. You should, or care about an educated population, an educated populace that is able to think critically about issues and participate in the system of government that we have here. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. The issue of the debt, it shouldn't be partisan. You need to understand that this is bondage. When you looked at this quote from Alexander Fraser Tyler, and he says, from bondage to spiritual faith, from great faith to great courage. And then you come down here, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence to bondage. This is bondage, people. This is what it's about. And it shouldn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican or left or right. These aren't partisan issues. These are issues that we should all care about. It says right here, debt per citizen. It doesn't say debt per Democrat or debt per Republican. It's debt per all of us. We're all in the same boat. Debt per taxpayer. We're all in the same boat. This is all of our debt that they're looting from us. And for them to do this, for them to loot us, they have to be able to rig elections. They have to keep the population dumbed down so the population doesn't see understand what's going on and able to think critically about the issues. The population, isn't wise to their treason because they're so dumbed down, but they also have to keep you fighting with one another. That's another part of their plan and how they do this wealth transfer and this looting and feeding on the American population. These traitors is divide and conquer. They keep you fighting with one another. If you're black and poor and you're, looking at another, even if you're middle class, if you're black and you work hard and you're middle class and you've done everything right and you go out and, get a good education and you got a good job and you work hard to take care of your household and take care of your family. And you're sitting there looking at white people and saying that white people who are in the same situation you're in middle class, struggling, maybe own a business, and they're the source of your problem. And the white person is saying, oh, look at the black person. That's the source of my problem. And these guys love it, and their friends love it. They don't care. They don't care. They want you fighting with one another, because as long as you're fighting with one another, you're not paying attention to what they're doing. Oh, man. It's so funny because they were all here in Chicago at the opening of Obama's Center. Not a library, it's a center. And just down the street, blocks away in Chicago, Chicago's got a serious problem. Homicides are up 8% in Chicago this year. In the first 6 months of this year, they've had 200 homicides in Chicago, right up the street where all these people were celebrating with the stars, John Legend, Bruce Springsteen, all the famous people. Oh, Obama's so cool. He's so great. People are being killed, murdered, just up the street from his center. People were saying that the reason that they designed the center that way is with no windows is because the windows would get shot out. Probably right. Probably right. But this is what they created. Take a listen to this clip.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is expected to sign an executive order aimed at curbing violence. Sage has talked about it. Data show that our city does need help in this category. Chicago is seeing an increase in homicides this year.
A lot of cities are, not just Chicago.
Apparently over 8% compared to June of last year. So joining us this morning to break down these crime trends in Chicago is Rosanna Ander. She is founding executive director of the University of Chicago Crime Lab. Rosanna, thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time. Let me start off by asking you this. What data are you going off of here? Does it come from the Chicago Police Department, and how reliable is it?
How reliable is it?
Yeah, it does come from the Chicago Police Department. There's a violence reduction dashboard that is publicly available.
How reliable is the data? Bro, all you got to do is count corpses. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do is count bodies. It's up 8%. Right up the street from where these guys are celebrating the opening of Obama's new center. These people, these traitors, these people are traitors, treason. These people they have intentionally destroyed our society and have put us in a position where the long-term success and longevity of the United States to continue as a democratic republic is in jeopardy. I want you to listen to this clip. This is about inflation. And we talked about inflation when we talked in the podcast about the debt, that the debt drives the inflation. This is where the inflation comes from. And it's very difficult to keep the inflation down as the debt continues to climb. Because that's where inflation comes from, inflating the currency. That's what's happening here. So, and again, that's why, going back to the Bush administration, that's why they created the housing crisis. They did it on purpose to show that growth so you wouldn't have the inflation as they're driving up the debt and running up the debt. So the inflation is coming from the debt. And so it's going to be very difficult. Like I said, Trump ran on affordability and bringing down prices, but he's not going to be able to bring down prices. Nobody's going to be able to bring down prices. Prices that we're at are the new normal. There's one way that you can bring down prices that I can think of is to decrease all the demand on the goods. And that'd be deporting. You deport, 30 million illegals, that'll bring prices down, but that's not going to happen. But so you're not going to be able to bring prices down. But take a listen to what's going on in inflation. Take a listen to this CNN clip.
There's new federal data that shows annual inflation topping more than 4% in May, which is twice as hot as the Federal Reserve's preferred target for inflation and the highest in more than 3 years. The jump in oil and gas prices, well, that is what's driving why you are paying more overall just to live your life. CNN's David Goldman is with us now to dig into the data here. David, what are the numbers saying?
Yeah, 4.1%. That is not what we want to see. That's the annual rate. And this, as you mentioned, is double what the Federal Reserve wants to see at 2%. We had 0.4% last month alone. And the problem is this is the highest since October of 2023. So we are now into 3-year high territory. This is a concern, Brianna, because this is real data. This is what people are actually paying. And when they don't have any money left in their wallet, then, that becomes an issue, certainly for the economy.
Yeah, you're going to have to cut back other places. And at the same time, we are now seeing gas prices fall at their fastest level since the U.S. and Iran reached a deal. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Okay, so now
this U.S. and Iran deal, it's really, I don't even want to get into that. I may talk about that here in a moment. But over the last 24 hours, Iran fired drones into some of the ships that are coming out of the strait, and that violates the ceasefire. They said that they were going to allow ships to come out for 60 days. I said that, let's see if they were going to take this sweetheart deal that Trump had put on the table for them. They obviously don't want it. I said I was going to talk about this in a moment. Let me just take a moment to say this, that they understand that this is an election year. They understand the political situation that Donald Trump is in. So they're going to do everything to hurt Donald Trump and the Republican Party in the midterm election. So I could see them trying to string Trump administration along, pretend like they want to negotiate, and maybe even stage a major attack in the fall or whatever. I wouldn't trust Iran. He gave them the opportunity. Like I said, it's a carrot and stick situation. But I just wanted to say that because he made reference to the oil prices coming down, which they have significantly. But who knows if that is going to stay the case now that this deal with Iran is, who knows what's going to happen with it.
And at the same time, we are now seeing gas prices fall at their fastest level since the U.S. and Iran reached a deal. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Okay, so now I want you to forget everything that I just told you, because that was May. Now let's look at June. Gas prices, oil prices are way down 18%, and that will have an effect on inflation this month, which will be reported next month. So this is already stale data. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind, though, is let's just strip all of that out of the report.
So I want you to understand what he's saying. He's saying that because gas prices did come down in the month of June, the inflation numbers may come down a bit when the June numbers are reported in July, is what he's saying. So just making that clear.
Prices, energy prices, all of those volatile prices, we are still at 3.4%. And
so that's core inflation. So if you don't know, core inflation, there's core inflation and headline inflation. Headline inflation has energy, all the volatile things that drive the inflation up. So he's talking about core inflation. Core inflation removes those volatile things like energy, gas, and stuff like that. And he's saying that still with its core inflation, removing the volatility, removing energy and all that stuff, you're still at 3.4%. Inflation's a problem. It's inflation's not as bad as it was under the Biden administration, but it's a problem. It's because of the debt.
All of that out of the report. Food prices, energy prices, all of those volatile prices, we are still at 3.4%, and that was another 3-year high. And that's a concern because the Fed wants this number to be at 2% as well. And so now they've got a tricky choice to make. Are they going to raise rates in the next month? That is not what President Trump hired Kevin Warsh to do at the Fed. So there are some other factors too. AI, housing, all of that factors into this number. Certainly people are paying a lot more. I will leave you on a positive note, though.
Listen, I'm gonna leave you on a positive note, is what he says. I want you to watch when this happens, because everything that he says is a problem. Inflation, core inflation, headline inflation, all up. We know that's going to be the case when the June numbers come out. But again, the war in Iran may not be over. I mean, the Strait may shut again. Who knows what's going to happen? So, but he says that I'm going to leave you with something positive. Take a listen to what he says here.
factors too. AI, housing, all of that factors into this number. Certainly people are paying a lot more. I will leave you on a positive note though. Spending, irrespective of inflation, was up 0.3% in May. That is good news because the economy is powered by consumer spending. About 70%.
So listen to what he's saying. So he's saying that all the inflation numbers are really, really bad, but spending's still up despite the inflation. So that's good for the economy because spending is still up despite the inflation. All right. Well, let's listen to same guy, different report. Listen to what he says here.
Mark Zandi says the K-shaped economy is still, in his words, firmly intact, where high-income individuals are getting richer and lower-income groups are struggling. And that could help explain why, even with economic headwinds like rising inflation, people keep spending. Here to help make it make sense is CNN Business senior reporter David Goldman. David, the questions why Americans are spending money despite economic fears. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a really good question because we know that people hate this economy. They really despise it. In fact, consumer sentiment is near an all-time low, and there are a few reasons why people think that the economy is expanding even though people really don't like it. Well, consumer spending makes up about 70% of the economy. Well, the top 20% of earners, well, those are the folks that are doing most of the spending. Look at
you hear this?
57.
You hear what he's saying? He's saying that all of the spending, yes, he's saying that spending is not decreasing as much as you would expect because the inflation is rising. So spending is staying consistent, but all of the spending is coming from the top 20% of earners. The bottom 80% is not spending. The bottom 80% is struggling through the inflation, and the top 20% are doing fine despite the inflation, and they're still spending. That's what he's saying. Take a listen.
Economy, well, the top 20% of earners, well, those are the folks that are doing most of the spending. Look at this, 57% of consumer spending done by the top 20% of earners. So they're really doing the bulk of the work there. That means that the bottom 80% are only spending 43% of all consumer spending, according to the Dallas Fed. So this is what we call the K-shaped economy.
So all the spending is coming from the top 20%. The inflation is rising despite the fact that 20% of the top earners are spending despite inflation rising, but the inflation is really hitting the bottom 80%. And that's why you have socialism on the rise. That's why I explained to you in the last podcast about socialism. And then you had the election on Tuesday where in New York, all these socialist candidates have swept through the congressional elections there, removed incumbents, powerful incumbents, Democrats, and the socialists are taking over the Democratic Party. Now, James Carville is having a tough time accepting that, but this has been a trend that has been going on in the Democratic Party going back to 2016, and Bernie Sanders run as a Democratic socialist, and they had to rig the election in 2016 in the Democratic Party for Hillary Clinton, which they rigged it to put a roadblock against Bernie Sanders. But this has been a trend that has been going on since at least 2016, maybe even before that. And now you see the manifestation of it really taking shape a decade later, especially with these elections on Tuesday, but we saw signs of this even before Tuesday. I mean, the mayor of Los Angeles is a communist. The mayor of New York is a communist. Both of the mayors of our two largest cities in this country are all communists. And then listen to what James Carville says here.
So the headline in the Axios headline this morning says, "Socialist earthquake leaves Democrats reeling." One Democratic lawmaker said, "Holy shit." S-H-I-T, buckle up. A Democratic strategist said, quote, "We will not stand by as our party contemplates writing this road to ruin." Are they just all, is this hysterical reaction, or are they right?
This is 90% hysterical reaction. It's 3 seats in New York City. Okay, come on, let's get real.
So he's discounting it as just 3 seats in New York City, that this is no big deal. This is bigger. I mean, what are you talking about? This goes back to Bernie Sanders in 2016. This move towards democratic socialists. What are you talking about? The mayor of Los Angeles is a communist. Is the mayor of New York is a communist. This is a trend that's been going on in your party for a while. What are you talking about? It's just 3 seats in New York. They just knocked off powerful incumbents in the Democratic Party. Goldman is, I mean, gosh, what are you talking about? That this is not, it's just 3 seats and this is not anything to be concerned with, Carville. This is your party now. This is who you are.
Hey, right.
This is 90% hysterical reaction. It's 3 seats in New York City. Okay, come on, let's get real. And by the way, 2 of them, I don't think are even Democrats. This Chevalier lady, they should not seat her in the caucus. Her views are totally against anything that any Democrat has. We believe in pluralism. She doesn't even believe in interracial dating.
Yeah.
I mean,
She's a nut job. This is your party, though.
There's a place in the party. I don't mind, by the way,
this is your party.
She wants to be a Democrat. Go do something else. Form your own party.
Yeah, you're talking about Daria Lisa Chevalier. She wants to abolish ICE. She at one point wanted to abolish police. She wanted to abolish all deportations of anyone, anywhere. In past social media posts, she called veterans war criminals, called President Biden a rapist, said COVID came from France, not China. Who is this person? And she just unseated an incumbent Democrat.
She is not a Democrat.
Yes, she is. Okay, she just won a Democratic primary. She just won she's going to Congress as a Democrat. To caucus, what do you mean she's not a Democrat? This is who your party is. But the point that I was making in the last podcast was telling you that socialism and straight up communism is on the rise. That is to be expected when you have situations like this. When you have rising inflation, the lower 80% of earners struggling while the 20% of top earners are keep spending through the inflation, and they're the ones that don't have a problem with it, and that, like I said in the last podcast, I called it a new Gilded Age. You can expect that socialism is going to be on the rise. There's going to be more socialism. But that, again, is part of the plan. It's part of the plan. We'll get to that clip in a moment. Let me play this clip. This is an older clip of G. Edward Griffin in the 1950s talking about a plan to subvert the United States from within by the Soviet communists, but just communism in general. The plan was, and this has been an ideological battle between Western forces and the Soviets, which really turned ideological, in the 1950s, where the Soviets and communists sought to bring the United States down through treason as a fifth column within the United States, bring the United States down from within, has been the vision of these communists. We'll listen to this clip first. This is G. Edward Griffin interviewing Yuri Brezhnev. He was a Russian defector, and he came to the United States as a Russian defector in like the 70s. And he did this interview with G. Edward Griffin, 70s, 80s. But I want you to listen to what he says about socialist subversion.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears open up their eyes and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process, which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy.
Notice how this is done through the education system, what Yuri is talking about here, that subverting. This is what the socialist communists, their objective to do decades ago. So they had to take over the education system so this could happen.
One generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism.
That's very important.
The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli.
I want to play more of this, but I don't have time to play more of this, but you should definitely. But this is what Yuri was talking about. Okay, so this is G. Edward Griffin, decades before in the 50s, talking about communists using racism and tribalism to divide the United States as part of this subversion, this communist subversion. Why don't you listen to what he says here?
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street.
They're working both sides of the street. They're working both sides of the street. This division, tribalism crises that we're facing right now, that we're all in the same boat. These guys want us fighting with one another. They want us fighting with one another so we don't pay attention to what they're doing. Because they're looting the place. They're looting the place. And have been looting the place. And if black people and white people understood how much we had in common being victimized by these people, then they wouldn't be able to get away with it. But they spent time, just like Yuri says, this is a slow process of dumbing people down through the education system, getting them to embrace this base instinct of tribalism to fight amongst each other, black, white, while these guys loot us. This is all part of the plan. This is the crisis. It's a crisis of tribalism, a crisis of division.
They calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street. They want hatred, violence, and bloodshed between the races, and they don't care how they get it or whom they use, even children if necessary. Here is a book that I think...
So that's what G. Ed Griffin was saying. So it's all, I mean, that's why, again, Obama was brought in to divide the country, even though he started his political career giving the keynote speech in 2004 at Kerry's, at the convention when they nominated Kerry. There's not a white America or a black America. We're all Americans. That's what he said. But when he got in, and what he's been doing is dividing this country. That's his whole objective, is dividing this country along racial lines and to increase this whole, attitude of us versus them. I've been watching a lot of the World Cup, and I've been watching all of these nationalists from other countries come in, like, I guess this is the people from Norway, and they all have this national pride. All these countries have national pride. And the Netherlands, they take over everywhere they go. There's so many of them here. They all have this national pride, and I think about the United States and how divided we are and how we don't have national pride. We have, we have 2 Independence Days. and it's not just because of slavery. In Brazil had more slaves than we had here in the United States. They don't have a Independence Day for white Brazilians and then African Brazil. They all have the same national pride. They all have the same, love for their nation. They're all rooting for their same national team. And I'll look at the United States, and we're encouraged not to have national pride. Why is that? What's going on here? This statement was made by this bald-headed African woman earlier this week, and I was thinking about this. I was like, what is this about? Now, some of it is the elite that are dividing us by design, but some of this is grifters that are making money and increasing their notoriety by selling this division, selling this tribalism, dividing us along racial lines. This bald-headed African woman said this week, and think about this. Think about what she's saying here.
Because in many ways, and with apologies to my dear spicy white friends, because I know that my white brothers and sisters do love a 4th of July. It is Independence Day. Everybody's barbecuing. It's a thing. I can promise you, Black folks, we will take that day off. We will barbecue because we off. But Black people, that nobody Black I know is really excited about the 4th of July, because it is what Frederick Douglass said it is. It is the celebration of slaveholders who freed themselves from having to pay taxes to the crown for their.
So it's a celebration of slaveholders. Nobody Black that this bald-headed African woman knows celebrates the 4th of July. That's crazy. That's crazy to me. That's very different than you see with some of these other, some of these, have countries have completely embraced pluralism and multiculturalism. They're not as, this is Norway. Norway's not as multicultural as maybe the Netherlands. But can you imagine that you're not going to celebrate the 4th of July and that no Black people celebrate the 4th? How can you have a cohesive country when you have idiots like this saying things like this? That nobody Black celebrates the 4th of July. It's not only the independence of the United States. And listen to what she says here. It's absolutely crazy.
Excited about the 4th of July because it is what Frederick Douglass said it is. It is the celebration of slaveholders who freed themselves from having to pay taxes to the crown.
Trying to sound smart. This bald-headed African woman is from Africa. Her family is, at least. She may have been born here in the United States, but she's not a Black American. And she's, putting all of this and saying that Black Americans don't celebrate the 4th of July. Who are you to say that? It's absolutely ridiculous. But listen to what Obama says, and just think about what you just heard Joy Reid say. Black people don't celebrate the 4th of July. This is what Obama, the Black King, said at his speech at the opening of his presidential center. Take a listen.
And since we're a few weeks away from America's 250th birthday, it is worth remembering just how radical the whole idea of self-government really was back in 1776. To that point, human history was a tale of conquest.
He's absolutely right. Lex Rex.
And rigid hierarchies. A world where the strong dominated the weak, where power and wealth and status flowed through lineage.
He's absolutely right.
And the many were ruled by the few. But out of the fire and steel of a revolution, a different story took flight on this continent. A declaration that we are all created equal, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that in the newly independent United States, there will be no kings or lords, no serfs or subjects, but only citizens, each of us free.
Everybody in the crowd is clapping. Everything that he's saying here is absolutely correct. That's what we celebrate on the 4th of July. It's a beautiful thing to celebrate, but you have this bald-headed African grifter here saying black people don't celebrate 4th of July. Well, Obama, all these people clapping at his presidential library, he makes this case for why you should. He didn't say that it was, rich landowners, fighting to keep their slaves and all that. That's not what Obama just said. What's going on here, people? What's going on here? Obama, even though he did get this part right about the 4th of July, this guy, like I said, he has been so divisive to this country. When he came on the scene, he divided this country along racial lines and created this tribalism like I've never seen. And again, he's part of this elite structure. This is part of the plan. That was part of the plan. They want to create division. You heard what G. Edward Griffin said. This is all part of the plan to create this division, create this tribalism, so we don't see ourselves as equal, all in the same boat, being ripped off by these traitors that were fighting amongst one another, not even paying attention to what they're doing, because we see each other as the enemy. And this guy was monumental in bringing about this division. I'm not saying that race relations were perfect before Obama, but my analogy that I have consistently used since Barack Obama was president, that racism is like a wound. And if you ever had a wound on your body where you've had a cut or a scratch on your body, it starts off, say you scrape your knee, you fall and you scrape your knee. It starts off where it's oozing blood. But after time, the blood stops. The wound starts forming a scab. It starts to heal. And that's where race relations were when this guy came in. That's why he was elected as the first white. People wanted to show that they were post-racial, especially after the 8 years of George Bush, that we can move beyond all of this division. That's why he was elected, to show that we had healed, that the bleeding had stopped, that the scab was forming. And this guy comes in and he rips the wound open again. The wound, and it wasn't only him and his surrogates, but he was brought into office to do this, to rip the wound open again. And the wound is still, to this day, right now, oozing fresh blood. It's an open wound again because of this guy. Last week on CNN, Abby Phillips asked the question, why do Republicans see, Obama as being divisive? Take a listen to what she says here.
Why is Obama considered by a lot of conservatives, and maybe you're one of them, to be so incredibly divisive? Is it because he told people he was black?
Right.
No.
Because he told people he was black. Because he told people he was black. And then this gets to it, okay? When Obama came in, every criticism that you had from Obama, as he is continuing the same strategy, the same foreign policy. It's pretty much the same domestic policy as Bush. It's pretty much the same. The cousins were pretty much the same. Like I already told you that he kept Gates on at the Pentagon, but that's only one example of continuity. It's all continuity. So if anyone complained about the fact that Obama's not doing what he said he was going to do, is it because he's black? You don't like him because he's black? I mean, this is Obama's grandparents and his mama. This is Obama's granddaddy, his grandmama, and his mama. This is Obama's family. Obama's heritage goes back to the Mayflower, to the earliest colonists on this continent that came from England. The Mayflower, Obama's ancestors go back. Obama's not black. This made me laugh too in his speech. I don't have very much time, but he says this in his speech. Take a listen. And this is all part of the grift.
And I didn't have much organizing experience.
So he's talking about when he first came to Chicago, after he graduated from Columbia, he drove a hoopty ride into Chicago. He was hired by this church to be a community organizer. And he says, I didn't have that much organizing experience. I wasn't, what qualified me to be a community organizer, whatever that is.
Didn't know anybody in Chicago. But I had been inspired by the civil rights movement.
I was inspired by the civil rights movement. What inspired you about the civil rights movement? Because that's not your history, buddy. You grew up in Hawaii, raised by your white grandparents. I wonder what inspired him about the civil rights movement. But that's part of the grift. That's not part of his history. But Abby Phillips says here, why is Obama considered divisive? Is it because he was black? Is that why you consider him divisive? No, fool, because he divided the country. He's still dividing the country. This is Pastor John, and he's a Christian pastor. He's black. And I follow him on X, but he put this on Facebook, and he put this post out earlier this week or the end of last week about Obama. And I want you to listen to what he says.
I want to say something carefully today. I prayed for Barack Obama every single day he was in office. The Bible commands us to pray for our leaders, but prayer does not mean silence. And the truth is, the Obama years divided this nation deeply, not just politically, racially, spiritually, culturally. A leader who truly wants unity does not fan flames. He pours water on them. And the America we have today is living with those consequences. I'm Pastor John. Follow along. I want to say something.
And he's absolutely right. America today is oozing with a wound that is oozing fresh blood. It's an open wound that was healing. And Barack Obama, not because he's black, don't have anything to. Pastor John's black. I'm black. I see it the same way as Pastor John. I see it the exact same way. And this was all part of the plan. Obama came in to divide us. These people are looting us. And this division, this tribalism is hurting this country in a huge, huge way. I have about a minute left. I got to read this from Booker T. Washington, My Larger Education. And Booker T. Washington is a brilliant man. He lived, he was born a slave. He was freed from slavery, became a, powerful thinker. And he writes this book. He wrote several books, but he writes this book, My Larger Education, that is a collection of essays that was published at the later part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century. The essays were written in those 2 decades. I think it was published around 1910, between 1910 and 1920. But he tells this story. I don't have time to go into the whole story, but you should go and read this book. But he tells this story about a doctor, a black doctor, who is treating this woman for cancer. She doesn't really have cancer, but he's making all this money off of her. and then he makes enough money to send his son to medical school, and the doctor, the black doctor, hadn't gone to medical school. He's like a witch doctor, or whatever, treating her for cancer. She had been paying him for all this money, treating her for cancer. He had made all this money, sent his son to medical school. His son comes back and then diagnoses the woman and says that you're cured from the cancer. So the father gets angry at the son and said, "Son, what are you doing curing this woman and saying, she doesn't have cancer anymore? I've made all this money off her. I'm getting this money." And then he comes to this conclusion. Booker T. Washington. I am afraid that there is a certain class of race problem solvers, race hustlers, that he relates to this story about these two doctors. I'm afraid that there is a certain class of race hustlers, race problem solvers who do not want the patient to get well. Because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living, but also a easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public. So there's a lot of that going on too. That's what this race hustler is, Abby Phillips. She's a race grifter, like the one Booker T. Washington is talking about. This bald-headed African woman is also a race hustler. There's a lot of race hustlers out there that are driving the wedge in this tribalism because they're making money off of it on both sides, white, black, on both sides, driving the wedge. But the elite are using them, and the elite own the media. The elite they will prop these race hustlers up, put them on TV, promote. Now they don't even have to be on TV. They can use social media and everything to get their race hustle out and get paid as well, gather many followers to get paid so they can keep the patient sick and keep the race hustle going on. That's something different than these elites that are intentionally using race to divide us because they know that it will bring down the United States. So that is our fifth crisis. We're going to introduce a new crisis on Monday. And then I won't be doing a podcast next Friday. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.